I am Indian number 37802704001. That's the first thing. That's a fundamental truth about me. Why is that important to you? Because the fundamental truth about your country, Canada, is that it's a segregated society. Did you know that? The oldest statute in Canada is the Indian Act of 1876. And it sets up a subclass of human beings. And to the government, even though I look like I'm trying to win a Mark Messier look-alike contest, to the government, I'm an Indian. Here's my card. There's my proof. That's who I am to our government in Ottawa. Why is this important? Because that statute is at the core of our country. And it's part of the sickness that's in our country. Because it sets up a statutory scheme for the otherness of the Indian. And this is a fundamental truth about Canada that we have to face. And the people in Ottawa, among all the other stuff they're up to, they're not doing a very good job of managing this problem. But the Indian Act and the dysfunctional, I think we can all agree, we're in a dysfunctional relationship, Indians and Canada, right? But the question is why? It begs two questions. Number one, why does the government want to have a segregated society? That's question number one. But the other question that people don't ask enough is, why do the Indians want to keep this going? Because that's a fundamental truth about our country. In fact, a lot of what's happened over history, our history, is the government trying to reduce the number of Indians, and Indians, mostly through litigation and government lobbying and guilt trips, trying to expand the number of people who are Indians. That sounds really strange, doesn't it? Right? Why would you want to be part of a segregated group? Well, I'm going to try to explain this for you and take you on a little bit of a journey to explain some fundamental truths about why, trying to answer those two questions, but I'm going to do it by referring to a couple of dead German guys. So let's talk about this otherness, okay? There was a philosopher, a theologian, the 20th century named Martin Buber. Many of you won't know that name. He lived in Germany. He was Jewish. He lived through part of the Hitler years. And then in 1938, he figured, okay, I should probably get out of this place, which he did. And he got out and he lived in the United States and he taught at universities until 1965. But he wrote a very, very important paper called the I, It, I, Thou synthesis. And what he said is that he talked about human relationships and also our relationship with the transcendent, okay? So the I, It is, and those of you will identify with both of these as I describe this, because in all of our relationships we find ourselves in situations like this. The I, It is where I'm in a relationship with somebody else, but I don't see them as a subject. They are an object. They are a thing. They are a means to my ends, right? And this is where we get into very dangerous ground. Because what we do then, we start to dehumanize human beings. And this is where great, great atrocities can happen. The most obvious example from the last century, if you think of the Nazis and the Jews, the Untermenschen, right? Again, a subclass of human beings. And using the auspices of law, they created that subclass, and then they were able to use the machinery of the state, the oppressive power of the state, the monopoly on violence of the state to carry out that agenda. So if I'm in an I-it relationship, I don't consider a person. I don't consider their wants. I don't consider their needs. Sort of like the way Alberta is in relationship to Ottawa, right? They don't care about us, okay? They've got their own concerns. They've objectified us. And this is exactly the situation that Indigenous peoples, Indian peoples, First Nations, if you want to call them that, although that's a lie, are in relation to Ottawa. So that's the I-it. What Buber said, though, is that what we need to be is we need to be in relationship of I-thou. What is the I-thou? The I-thou is where you regard other people as subjects, as ends in themselves, as sentient beings with their own ideas, their own qualities, their own values, their own fundamental importance. In Jewish philosophy and in Christianity, we call this the imago Dei. We're made in the image of God, and therefore we have inherent value. And this is what Buber was talking about. But even in a secular sense, if you think about it, any type of productive, useful relationship, healthy relationship, is going to involve that, right? You have to think about other people as ends in themselves, as having the same value as you do, right? Christ phrased this in terms of loving your neighbor as yourself, right? That's the I-it, the I-thou. What we need to get to, and the reason why I mentioned Buber, is we need to get to a situation in Canada where we get out of the objectification of other human beings, and we need to get back to a place where we're actually seeing other human beings as having value. We respect people who disagree with us. Where we actually get to the point where, heaven forbid, we love them. We love them more than power. We love them more than money. We love them even more than our country. Right? So, how does this apply to Indians? I'll explain. But before I get to that part, I've got to talk about the other German guy. He's dead too. In fact, he said that God was dead. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. He was wrong about that. Nietzsche's dead. God's alive, and he's here. But Nietzsche is a very interesting man. And he is an example of someone who actually lived something that we hear a lot of, about how there's a fine line between genius and madness. And Nietzsche was a brilliant man. He wrote some of the most profound things in philosophy and touching on law, but he battled drug addiction. He battled mental illness. And sadly, he died far too early, but he left behind some incredible writings. And one of them I'm going to share with you today applies very much to the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Who knows what a parable is? Okay? Yeah, if you've read the Bible, you know Jesus was wont to talk in parables. The most famous one is probably the one about the prodigal son. But Nietzsche wrote a parable. It was called the parable of the Tarantula. The parable is like an allegorical story. It speaks in metaphor, tries to teach something using symbolic language. So what's the parable of the tarantula? Well, Nietzsche was talking about power. He was talking in terms of how human beings use and destroy each other, right? The powerful and the powerless. You see where I'm going with this? So, the tarantula in the parable is essentially, for Nietzsche, and I think today, is what we would call the political left, the liberals, the globalists, right? The ones who want to destroy 7/8 of the Earth's population and think that's a good idea. Those guys. The Marx Carney crowd. Yes, I said Marx Carney. So coming back to the parable, in the parable, you know, if you think of that spider, that big, hairy, venomous, hungry spider, that's the woke crowd. That's the people who want to control everything. They want to control our food supply. They want to take away healthy foods and medicines, like Mr. Buckley talks about. They want to take away our freedom. They want to take away our access to information. They want to take away our human agency. They want to take away our lives. They want to kill us. Dead. Dead, dead, dead. That's what they want. That's what the tarantula is. It's a killer, it's a predator, it's a spider. Captures victims and sucks the life out of them, leaving dross and dust. That's the spider, that's the killer. And where does the Indian stand up to this? Well, the Indian sees the glitter of the web, and he wanders in there and he thinks, oh, this looks okay. And the spider, what does the spider say? Nietzsche says the spider comes to the victims, his victims, and says, come to me. I offer you equality. I offer you vengeance. You're a victim. You're not my victim. You're their victim. I will offer you. I have power. I have agency. You have none. You need me. You join up with me. Come into my web. I'll save you. I will give you retribution. I will give you equality. I will give you reparations. You will have power, but only through me. And then the victim is in the web. And what happens to, you all know this, what happens next? The tarantula comes, consumes the victim. Why? What does the spider want? What do they want? Money? No, they already have money. What are these guys after? You all know, tell me. Control and power, yes. That's what the spider wants. The spider wants to grow bigger and fatter and hairier. And the more it consumes, the hungrier it is. And the web grows, and the web is that control. So how does this work? Well, do y'all remember BLM? Yeah, we found out BLM was actually big luxury mansions. But the tarantula used those people, didn't they? And now BLM's a joke. Remember George Floyd? They erected statues of him. But what do people think about him now? He's used up. He's eaten, consumed. What about the transgender cult? Remember that? It's already sinking into our history, isn't it? Right? The left used them too. A small fraction of society seemed to control everything. I mean, we had a man in the Olympics beating up women and we gave him a gold medal. That's the tarantula at work, right? But the problem is, if there's going to be a spider, there has to be victims. And that's where the Indians are. And too many of them don't realize it. So I'm going to bring this down to the kind of street level, show you how this works. Right now, in Alberta, there's an Indian chief and his band who have filed a lawsuit against the government of Canada because they want to block the referendum that you people were signing up for today. Now, this sounds bizarre, doesn't it? Imagine if 40,000 of the richest people in Ottawa, imagine if the Ottawa government, the government of Canada, filed that suit. What would you say then? Then your reaction is different, right? See how the tarantula works? You know how many Indian people, I'm going to use that word. It's not like the N word yet, but I'm an Indian, so I'm going to exercise license here. How many Indian people do you think are living on reserve in Alberta today? Take a guess. Someone says 100,000. Higher or lower? Lower. It's less than 42,000 people. The province of Alberta, the population just crested 5 million. And less than 42,000 people want to tell us that we can't have a referendum on independence. What does that sound like? It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But, you see, it's not the tarantula telling us that. It's the victim. It's the tarantula's emissary. And so we don't see it, we don't complain. And where do we focus our vilification? Where do we focus our anger? Who do we blame? Oh, those greedy Indians. They've always got their hands out. They always want more. We blame the fly in the web. We don't even look at the big, fat, ugly, hairy spider. And in the end, the Indian is the one who gets his blood sucked. He's the one who's turned to dust by the spider. So we don't see how this works. I'm going to leave you end off with a couple of anecdotes that illustrate this point. There's a man named Leslie Watney, very wise Indian man. And I want to tell you a little bit about him. He was born in 1928 in a one-room log cabin on a reserve in Saskatchewan, just like my great-grandfather was. And he endured a childhood of poverty and hardship. His education was his release, and he went on to become the first Aboriginal to practice law in Western Canada. He also served as the inaugural president of the National Indian Council in 1961. He came to prominence with his controversial 1971 book called Ruffled Feathers. Well, you should check this book out. And it argued for the end to the Canadian Indian Reserve System, which he believed trapped his people in poverty and despair. He wanted to get out of the web. He wanted to get out of the tarantula's clutches. He dreamed of a Canada where Indigenous people live side by side, like all other Canadians, in an I-thou relationship, not an I-it relationship, and ended the same rights and benefits. Such an argument for true racial equality put him at odds with the liberal elite of Canada's Native community, who still believe in a segregated, race-based relationship between Indigenous people and the rest of Canada. And for telling the truth to power, Watney was ostracized from the Native political community and banned from his own reserve. He died in 2015, and adding insult to injury, his daughter is a prof at the University of Manitoba who has rejected everything her father fought for. Wanda Watney, I'll name her. Wanda Watney. She says that her father was wrong. He was delusional. So that's one side. The Indians want to keep this going. Now I'll end off with the other side. Our Prime Minister, Mark Carney. When the 1996 Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples attacked the legacy of residential schools, Mark Carney's father, who was a central figure in the operation of residential schools in this country, he penned a sharp critique. He pointed out that the schools were not jails, despite frequent claims that students were there against their will. In fact, parents had to sign an application form to enroll their children in residential school, and he bristled at the lack of context in the report. And he's right, you should read it. He noted that schools performed a key social welfare function in caring for sick, dying, abandoned, and orphaned children. My grandmother was raised in Indian residential school, and I would not have had a snowball's chance in hell of getting an education, let alone being a lawyer and having the privilege of standing here today if she had not gone to residential school. But in the midst of the last federal election campaign, Mark Carney, who's been in the hallowed halls of Harvard and Oxford and sips tea in Davos, he rejected all of his father's views. His father spent a lifetime in the residential school, but Mark Carney knows better. He says, I love my father, but I don't share those views. He says it's denialism and complicity. So, what have I told you? I've told you there's a lot of problems. But to quote the great Fred Flintstone to his neighbor, Weirdly Gruesome, no one that's half the battle. So we know the problem. So I just want to finish off with this thought, and that is one that I think is more inspiring. And this is from Augustine of Hippo, who said, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose and it will defend itself." I hope I've loosed some upon you today. Thank you very much.